Okay, everyone. So this is going to be a little chat about things you need to know for next patch, for the Ascending Tide patch that's coming tomorrow, Monday, the 14th of March. So first things first for tanking. The new tank gear. There are going to be new sets coming next patch. And there are 3 good options for tank gear for next patch. If we take a little look at the different options we've got. So the first gear that we're going to see comes from the new dungeon, which is Shipwright's Regret. And for the first item, it's going to be the monster set. So the Nazare monster set is going to be the first time you want to pick up next patch. You're going to have to do Vet Shipwright's Regret to get this. You're going to need Undaunted keys for the shoulder. And this is going to be a tank set because when you look at it, we're going to get max health, and then when you cast an ultimate ability, the closest 6 enemies within 12 meters have all major debuffs and minor debuffs that are applied to them, extended by 1 second per 20 ultimates spent. This set has a cooldown per target of 30 seconds. So each enemy that gets hit with this particular debuff set has to wait 30 seconds. So this is not something you're going to want to stack with multiple users, because obviously it's on a 30-second cooldown. So you are going to want to potentially stack ultimate for this to do extended durations. When you actually consider it, though, you've got to be really careful about using this. This isn't going to be like a meta situation for every single class, every single trial group, every single thing. Because major and minor debuffs are really good, and it's good to extend those. But you've got to really look at which ones are you applying. So it's going to be nice to get a bit of an extended duration on your minor brittle. It's going to be nice to get an extended duration on your major maim in situations where you use it. It's going to be great for increasing the duration of your major vulnerability. But overall, there's not a huge amount of debuffs that are going to be worth extending. So like Major Breach, for example, there's no point in extending that because we still need to taunt the enemy every 15 seconds. So an extended duration of that isn't that useful. But there are a lot of things that are going to get buffed and extended, so we have to consider those. This is going to be an option for tank monster sets next patch. The other set is also from Shipwright's Regret. This is a brand new set. The Turning Tide gear set. It's a heavy armor set. It drops from Shipwright's Regret, even on normal. And this set is going to be really strong. Now, we have to be in a situation where we're comparing the options. So, Sax Champion is a gear set that provides major force and nothing else. And we've been using that for like 3 patches now. Turning Tide is a gear set that's going to provide major vulnerability and not really anything else. But the major vulnerability uptime that you can get from Turning Tide is better than the major force uptime you'll typically get from Sax. So when you look at it, Turning Tide is going to be a good set. It's going to be a useful set. On your own, just as a tank, I think this is going to be a main tank set, and it's definitely going to be a dungeon set that you're going to want to use. And it's got a great uptime. Look at that. It's got a 10-second duration of major vulnerability, and it can be activated every 15 seconds. I've already spoke about this in another YouTube video, though. You want to go and check that out if you want to see how to maintain really good uptimes of this particular gear set, the Turning Tide set. You need to go and watch that video, because I can show you in that video how to keep a 60-second non-stop uptime of Turning Tide, but that's with combining it with the Nazare monster set. You can get 60 seconds non-stop major vulnerability, which is really insane. So this is coming next patch as well. This is definitely a gear set you're going to have to get as a tank. Like I say, dungeons definitely going to be useful. Arenas, trials, most likely a main tank set. So definitely pick this up. It does mean that obviously necromancers are probably not going to use the Colossus ultimate anymore. And that's fine. They can just use a damage ultimate instead. They can do more damage in that kind of way. So this is looking pretty sweet. Okay, so the other gear set is from the Imperial City. Now, there's a boss in the Imperial City called Nunatek. It's a Frost Atro boss. It's inside the Imperial City, and it's now going to drop this monster set. Now, this isn't something that's going to be super, super useful, because this is an unreliable monster set. When we're thinking, when are we going to use a certain gear set, it has to have reliability. So, Encratis is a reliable set. It has a reliable uptime, a reliable way to proc it. It's reliable. This is an unreliable gear set. It's got a low uptime. It's got the buff that it's going to provide, sorry, the debuff that it's going to provide. We don't need it, really. The only time I can see this being useful for tanks is for ad pulls. I do think that we are going to get some use out of this potentially on ad pulls, because when we're in an ad pull, it's hard to reach the crit cap in an ad pull, because you might not have EC on everything. You might not have brittle on everything. You might not have a Warhorn major force uptime. So there might be things that you're missing in an ad pull which brings Nunatech into a tank set. When you think about it, like as the off tank and the main tank, you could be running one Encratis, one Nunatech inside an ad pull in a trial. The reason why you could use this now is because you don't need to immobilize the enemy to proc it. At the start of the PTS, you had to have the enemy immobilized to proc the major brittle. Now you don't need to. You just have to have it on the ground and it'll proc major brittle even if it doesn't immobilize the enemy. But it does take 4 seconds to activate. This is why it's not that good. It takes 4 seconds to activate and it lasts for 4 seconds. It's not great, but it could be useful for an ad pull because in an ad pull, things usually take 8 to 10 seconds to kill. If you've got a 4-second burst of major brittle, that could be quite useful for ad pulls. But in terms of bosses, I really don't think this is going to be good at all. The effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. So it's on a huge cooldown. Now, some people have asked me, can you time this with Nazare? Well, the answer is yes, you can. So if somebody's using the Nazare monster set and someone's using the Nunatech monster set, you proc Nunatech, then you proc Nazare, it's going to extend the duration. However, I don't know hardly any groups in ESO that are going to be that coordinated that they can do both at the same time. There's very few groups that are going to be able to coordinate. Right, I'm going to proc my Nunatech now. Proc Nunatech, and then someone goes, right, I'm going to proc my Nazare now. And they proc Nazare and it extends the duration. It's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. It's an unreliable monster set, so it's not going to be good for boss fights. It's not going to be good for most situations. It would potentially be useful for trial ad pulls, and that is probably the place where I'd use it the most. In terms of tank gear, because of a few changes that are happening in the game, so we've got the hybridization stuff going on that's going to bring more hybridization to damage dealers. This means that gear sets like Crimson Oath might see some more use now. At the moment, we use Crimson Oath potentially for trial ad pulls again, for ad pulls in dungeons. You might use this for stamina groups, and you might use this as a beginner tank if you forget to put down your Crusher and maintain your blockade. You might use Crimson Oath. If groups start to see more people using stamina or more medium armor pieces, then we could see an increase in the use of Crimson Oath in trial groups as well. So Crimson Oath could become a more improved set, not because there's any changes happening to it, but because of the changes to the group compositions. So you will have to watch out. Crimson Oath could potentially become a very useful set as well next patch. The second big change coming next patch for tanks is the fact that weapon enchants and gear sets will no longer proc other gear sets. Huge change to a lot of people. So the big thing that changes here is a lot of tanks that aren't Dragon Knight tanks, for example, will use a flame glyph on their one-handed weapon to proc their Encratis. That's not going to work anymore. So as you can see here, we have got a flame glyph on the one-hander. We're going to put Encratis on. So we've got one Encratis there, two Encratis. So we've got Encratis, and we've got the flame glyph. When we use our weapon, you can see the fire on the enemy there. It's not proccing Encratis. Look, there you can see the fire, look. That's the flame glyph proccing. But there's no Encratis anywhere, look. No Encratis to be seen anywhere. If we use a flame skill, straight away there's Encratis. So, weapon enchants cannot proc gear sets next patch. The reason why is because when you use your weapon, so if I use Pierce Armor, when I use Pierce Armor, I'm using the Pierce Armor skill. And that procs the glyph, the flame glyph. The flame damage isn't a direct source of flame damage. It is a proc of flame damage. So what that means is it's not going to proc my gear set. What this also means is if you're a tank who uses Elemental Catalyst for whatever reason, you're now not going to be able to in most cases. So if you're a Dragon Knight tank using Elemental Catalyst, you've got no way of getting the shock damage. We used to use an infused Frost Staff with a shock glyph, and we'd use Engulfing Flames or something like that. That's now not going to work. It's not going to do it. So it's ineffective now to run EC on a tank. It was ineffective anyway to run EC on a tank, because tanks aren't very good at maintaining 100% uptime compared to a damage dealer. So typically EC shouldn't really be used on a tank anyway. Now it definitely shouldn't, because you're not going to be able to maintain those weaknesses that give that crit damage buff. As we mentioned before with Nunatech and other things, when we're looking at gear sets, we're looking at consistency. If a gear set is consistently there and it's active and it's 100%, it's a good gear set. EC on a tank is not a consistent set because you're not able to now maintain certain effects from it. You're not able to maintain 100% uptime of it usually because of having to have block phases where you can't bar swap and go into your back bar to activate this, this, and this. So generally, Elemental Catalyst shouldn't be used anyway. In terms of next patch, you don't want to be using it on a tank because of the inability to do so. Now, people will ask, can you not proc it with the Vatishran staff? The answer is no, because the Vatishran staff is a gear set. It won't work. So here we go, look. So casting weakness to elements on a target within 15 meters of you causes a surge of elements of energy to tether between you and for 10 seconds. Now, so this is not going to proc Elemental Catalyst because the staff has a 2-piece bonus, which is a proc. So when you cast this skill, it will proc the flame damage, the shock damage, the frost damage. It's a proc. It's not a direct source of damage, so it doesn't work. It doesn't proc Elemental Catalyst. The only thing you could do to proc Elemental Catalyst, if you had to, would be to use Crushing Shock. So when you use Crushing Shock, it does flame damage, frost damage, and shock damage. But it doesn't last long enough. So you're going to have to be spamming this once every 3 seconds to gain EC. It's ineffective. It's not a reasonable thing to ask a tank to do. It's not reasonable to expect a tank to cast Crushing Shock once every 3 seconds to maintain Elemental Catalyst. So Elemental Catalyst is not going to be on tanks next patch. It's not going to work. It's not effective. The uptime is not good enough. The way of proccing it isn't reliable. It is reliable on a damage dealer. It is okay to use on a damage dealer. It works on a damage dealer. It needs to be on a damage dealer. Yeah, so a big change next patch is the hybridization changes that are coming along, which means potentially there's going to be a lot going on for tanks. The reason why a lot happens for tanks is, for example, using Stone Giant on a Magicka Dragon Knight is going to be something that you can now do quite effectively. So what that means is, what use is the Dragon Knight main tank? There isn't as much use now, or should we say it's not essential to use a Dragon Knight main tank. If you're using a DK main tank because you want Stagger in your group, that's now not going to be a thing that you need to do, because you could have a Magicka damage dealer, a Magicka Dragon Knight using Stagger. So it's not essential now to try to optimize your supports to be a DK main, a Necro off tank, a Warden and a Templar, or whatever it is you're using. You could pretty much go with whatever setup fixes best to your group. So it might be a Sork tank. It could be a Warden tank. There's more options available in terms of what you can play as with a tank next patch. So at the minute, like I say, the kind of standardized tank setup is a DK main tank and a Necro off tank, and that is not going to be essential anymore, just because of the changes that are happening. This does mean that we've got more openness to play other classes. This is a good thing generally, that we don't have this forced situation where you've got to play a DK, you've got to play a Necro to be able to get into the trial groups. You're going to be able to play literally whatever you want, or whatever your group want you to play. There's not going to be a necessity to play those particular classes. What I will say, however, is a DK main tank is still going to be effective in the way that it's better to sustain. Its self-healing capabilities are pretty good. It's good for all-round survivability. So even though Dragon Knights are not essential because they're not going to need to use Stagger anymore, they're still going to be very, very good because they have the great sustain tools, they have Igneous Shield, they have their survivability, so they're still going to be excellent to use. Okay, in terms of other changes coming for next patch, we've got a few skill changes that are going to be kind of useful for tanks. One of them is for the Dragon Knight tank. So we've got Burning Embers. Now, if you're using a Dragon Knight tank and you're using Kratis, you're probably going to want to proc it with Burning Embers. So this is a skill you're going to need to have. So to proc in Kratis, we've already discussed this. To proc in Kratis, you're going to need a flame skill. The flame skill you want to use is going to be Burning Embers. And the reason for that is because you heal for 102% of the damage done with this ability. So it's a heal over time, and it's a way to proc in Kratis. So that's going to be a really, really good thing for DK tanks. Another big skill change is Engulfing Flames. Now, typically, Engulfing Flames hasn't really been used by tanks for a while because most groups have Magicka DKs in them. This is going to be more difficult to get up to 10% next patch. If you look at the change here, affected enemies take more damage from all flame damage attacks based on your weapon and spell damage. Weapon and spell damage. With a maximum of 10% bonus damage taken. You've now got to increase your weapon and spell damage to be very, very high to get the damage bonus. This is not effective for tanks, so we're going to have to lose so many stats and so many other buffs to get ourselves up to that 10% that it's not really effective to use on a tank. There are some situations where I'd still consider using it even at a 6 or 7 or 8% bonus, because if you don't have it, having 8% is better than having 0%. To get to the 10% is going to require quite a bit of effort, so I would say generally it's not going to be worth it. I would avoid trying to apply Engulfing Flames. I would be running Burning Embers instead to proc you in Kratis and those kinds of things. One of the other big changes is to the Power Slam skill, or the Power Bash skill. This is now effectively an actual bash instead of just an animation or like bash. It's just an animation bash that doesn't actually cause a bash. This is now effectively an actual bash. And the reason why this is important is because it will proc bash gear sets. So it will proc Vycosa, it'll proc Turning Tide, it'll proc Drake's Rush, it'll proc your Void Bash as it does already. Anything that requires a bash to proc a gear set, this will now work because it is effectively a bash. It wasn't before. It was just damage, and it was like it was an animational bash, but it wasn't really classed as being physical bash damage, and now it is. It's also a pretty decent damage skill for tanks, so that is another change that's coming with the next patch. So another change that you're going to see for next patch is regarding your collections. So any trial that has a perfected version and the non-perfected version. So let's take Sunspire, for example. We've got the perfected Claw of Yolnahkrin set. If you unlock a perfected piece of gear now, this is also going to unlock the non-perfected piece of gear. So if you've got pieces that you don't have collected for the non-perfected set, they're now going to get unlocked when you collect the perfected version. Now, if you're somebody who obviously does vet trials, this is a good thing because you might not do normal trials and you won't have the non-perfected gear and you want to collect it. Now, it's not going to be a problem because when you collect the perfected version, the non-perfected one will unlock as well. So great stuff for collectors who want to complete their sticker book but don't want to have to do loads and loads of normal trials for gear that they're never going to use. So that's kind of a good change as well. One of the other changes that's coming next patch is regarding your Undaunted leveling. So now because we've got account-wide achievements, the way that you used to level up Undaunted was by doing Undaunted achievements, by doing the hard modes, by doing by clearing each dungeon and then doing the hard mode and then doing those achievements would unlock Undaunted points. That's now obviously not the case because we've got all the achievements unlocked on every character because of the account-wide achievements. So now you're going to get points based on the content you do. So doing a daily delve is going to net you some Undaunted points. You're going to get 10. When you get an achievement, obviously now you're not going to get any Undaunted points because we've already got the achievements unlocked. So especially this is mainly for secondary characters, it's going to be a problem. When you do a dungeon quest, you are actually going to get Undaunted points now. You're going to get 25 Undaunted points for completing the dungeon quest for the first time. When you do a pledge on normal, you're going to get 25 instead of 10. When you do a pledge on vet, you're going to get 50 Undaunted points instead of 20. You're now going to get 100 Undaunted points for doing a pledge on vet hard mode. You're going to get Undaunted points for doing a trial quest on normal. You're going to get 50 points for that, and you're going to get 100 Undaunted points for doing a trial quest on vet. So there's more ways now to level up your Undaunted skill line because they're not tied in with achievements like they currently are on the live server. So on the next patch, you're going to get your Undaunted leveled up by doing dungeon quests, trial quests, doing randoms, and by doing your pledges. So that's going to be a new change to leveling your Undaunted skill line. So that's all the things, guys, that you need to know that are coming along with the Ascending Tide patch. And yeah, if you've got any questions about anything else regarding the patch, let me know in the chat and I'll try my best to answer all your questions. So thanks for watching this.